Well, hey, everybody. It's your boy, Mr. Perry. Once again, we're back at it. We got Unit 2, Lesson 4. This time, we're going to be looking at calling methods with parameters and a few other things. We got a lot of vocab in this lesson and a lot of skills that we need to look at as well. So let's go ahead and get into it. All right, so let's just recall a couple of things. Remember that a method is instructions for a behavior or an action that an object can perform. And recently you've started working with the turtle class, and we have some turtle class methods right here. Every time you call forward, turn left, or turn right, you are calling a method. And just remember that someone else has already written that code or those instructions in order to complete those tasks. So all of those instructions are abstracted from you. It's all a part of encapsulation in Java. So we don't really need to worry about all the code that makes it work. We just need to know that we need to create an object of the turtle class and then call those methods. Now, remember too that a method signature consists of the method name and sometimes an empty set of parentheses if we're looking at methods that don't take any parameters. So for instance, public void method 1, this is the method signature right here. Now this word void, we're going to discuss what that means in the next lesson. But basically all you need to know is that when you're looking at a method, this is the method signature. And then everything that is contained within those curly braces, those are the set of instructions. So that is the code needed to complete that task, or what we might call the implementation of that method. Now we can go look at the signature to determine what arguments the method uses and what type they need to be. So for instance, right here, public void method 1, there is nothing in these parentheses. So that means this takes no parameters. And so when we call method 1, we're going to call it with nothing inside those parentheses. However, down here, public void method 2, this one has 2 integers in its method signature. And so that tells us that in order to call the method 2 while we're in main, we need to make sure that we are passing in 2 integers as the arguments so that they become the parameters for this particular method. So when we call method 2 with 3 comma 5, that's going to pass those in as our ints x and y, and it's going to end up printing out 8. So now let's get into some vocabulary here. So in Java, we have what are called formal parameters, and formal parameters are what you will see in the class file where you have the methods being defined kind of towards, the bottom half of the class file. That's typically where we have all of our methods being defined. So public void method 2, int x, int y, these are what we would refer to as formal parameters. And they are the defined variables that can be put into a method to help it complete its task. So formal parameters are what we call these things when we are referring to them in the method definition and specifically in the method signature. Now, if we're in main and we are calling methods from main, we use different terminology. You call these arguments or what are called actual parameters. And that's the data that the method takes in to complete the task it was designed for. But it's basically wherever you are calling the method, especially if, obviously if you're in main, that's where it would happen most frequently. But anywhere a method is being called and something is inside the parentheses, those are called arguments or actual parameters. And so here we have employee, emp1 equals new employee. So we're instantiating an object of the employee class. And the employee's name is Sasha, and it looks like Sasha is paid $23.50 an hour. And then down here, int hours worked equals 35. And now double pay amount equals, and now we're using the emp1 object to call the method calculate pay. And we are passing in hours worked as the arguments or actual parameters for that method. And so if we were to hop into main, if we were to hop into the employee class, we could look at where the calculate pay method is defined. And here we have public double calculate pay int hours, and it returns hours times the wage. So that would get returned right here, and it would get stored as this variable pay amount, and then pay amount could be concatenated to this string. So up here, when we're in main, hours worked qualifies as the argument or the actual parameter for the call to the calculate pay method. Whereas down here, if we were to go into the employee class, hours works gets passed into the method as the formal parameter hours. So hopefully that makes sense to you in terms of how, while we're in main, we can call a method and we can pass in arguments or actual parameters, and those get passed into the method in the actual class file to become the formal parameters for that method. All right, now there is such a thing as overloading methods, just as we could overload constructors. So just as with constructors, we can overload methods to complete specific tasks depending on the arguments we put into it. So over here, we've got 3 versions of public void add. One has 0 formal parameters. One version of it has 1 formal parameter. And then down here, we have a version that has 2 formal parameters. So if I'm in main and I call the add method with 0 arguments, that's going to go into this one. And it's going to set x to 1, y to 2, and it's going to print 3. If I call the add method with a single argument with the number 4, that gets passed in to be the formal parameter x, and then x and y get added together. That would print out 6. If I call the add method with 2 arguments, 20 and 15, those get passed in as the formal parameters x and y, and once again, we're just going to print out the sum, so that would print out 35. And if I tried to call the add method with 3 arguments, that would create an error, because when you look over here, there are no versions of the add method where it has 3 formal parameters. So there you go. That one would just result in an error. So it's important that when you call a method, that there is a version of the method where the data types and the order match up. If the data types don't match, or if the order of the data types don't match, like if you had a double and an int and you tried to call it with an int and a double, for instance, then that would result in an error. So it's important that your arguments match your formal parameters. So now we'll close this out with a little bit of some tracing once again, and this time we're going to trace some methods, and we're going to try to figure out what's going to output when we run this code. So up here we've got public void method 1, which prints hello. Then we've got public void method 2, which takes in 2 formal parameters, prints their product, and then it calls method 1. And then down here, this is our main method. So if we were going to trace this out, we would want to start down here at the main method. And now is a great time to go ahead and pause the video and try to work this out, to sort of look through, okay, what happens here? What do you think is going to happen? What do you think is going to output? And then just kind of keep tracing the code back and forth to figure out what you think is going to output on our screen. I'm going to assume at this point you've paused the video, so let's go ahead and work through it. So when you're tracing code and you have a main method, obviously you always start at your main method. And so when we go inside, the first thing we're going to do is we encounter a call to method 1. So that means we need to jump up here to method 1. And I'm going to go ahead and keep this arrow right here because we need to complete method 1 before we go on to method 2. So we've now jumped up to method 1, and I need to trace what's going to happen up here. So we get to the first print statement, which prints hello. And then we get to this final curly brace. So that's the end of method 1, which means we can jump back to down here in main. So now we go down to method 2. and we're gonna, it has the arguments 4 and 5. So once again, we need to jump up to method 2, and I'm keeping my arrow here because we have not completed method 2. And so now we are going to call method 2 with 4 and 5. So we're going to print 4 times 5. So now we're getting our product of 20. But now we get a call to method 1. So again, we haven't completed method 2. So I'm going to leave this arrow here. And now I'm going to jump up here to method 1 and do what method 1 tells us to do, which of course is to print hello. And then this ends method 1, which means we can jump back to here. And now we finished method 1, and we have now finished method 2 since we get to this final curly brace. So now we can jump back to our red arrow, and it says, okay, now we need to call method 1 one more time. So just like we did before, we jump to method 1, we print hello, we finish method 1, and then finally we finish main. We get to our last curly brace, and that's the end of main. So hello 20, hello, hello is what prints with this little bit of code that you see right here. So remember that the control flow of a program is the order in which individual statements, instructions, or methods are executed. When a method is called, the program's execution jumps into that method and then executes its statements from, beginning to end. And then when it gets to that final curly brace, it jumps back to the point where the method was called and then moves on to see if there are additional things that need to happen. So this idea is referred to as control flow. And before we go, let's look at one other interesting thing that can happen, what we'll call an interesting mistake. So just like before, we've got our main method right here, and it's calling method 1 with 3 and 5. Now, right up above it is method 1, expecting our 2 formal parameters, x and y. Let's go ahead and trace this one. And again, feel free to pause the video here and trace this one out and see if you can figure out what's going to output when we run this code. I'll assume you've paused the video. Let's go ahead and see what's going to happen. So we begin at main just like always, and now we need to call method 1 with arguments 3 and 5. So we jump up here to method 1, we pass in 3 and 5. So now we're going to print 8, and now it says call method 1 with 3, 5. So like we did before, we need to jump back up to the top and call method 1 once again with 3 and 5 as our arguments. So we're going to print 8 once again, and then we encounter, let's call method 1 again with 3 and 5. So once again, we would have to jump back up and call method 1 with 3 and 5. We're going to print 8, and then it's calling method 1 once again. So you've probably figured out that this puts us in an infinite loop. We just basically over and over and over again print the number 8. And the problem is because we're calling method 1 right here, we never get to this final print statement, which means we never finish method 1, which would put us back down here, and then we would finish our main method. Okay, so there you go. Let's go ahead and get to our lesson review. So some methods take in parameters, which we call formal parameters in the method signature, that will impact how they behave. The data types and the order of the arguments or the actual parameters where the method is being called must match the data types and the order of formal parameters in the method signature. And if they don't match, either in data type or in the order that they are being included, that's going to result in an error. Some methods are overloaded, meaning that there are different versions of the same method name with unique method signatures. And then finally, method tracing is important to understanding control flow, and it's something that we'll just continue practicing. It's definitely going to pop up on your AP exam. All right, with that, guys, we're come to the end. Thank you for watching another video. Don't forget to leave a question or a comment, and I will see you in class.